Okay, welcome to the Friday Transportation Seminar at Portland State University. My name is Leming Wang. I'm co-hosting the seminar with Professor Chris Monsieur here. Today we'll have Tara Weidner to talk in a seminar about bike planning in Oregon. Tara is a senior travel demand modeler at the Oregon's Transportation Planning and Analysis Unit. And with that brief introduction, I will give the floor to Tara.
Perspective.
Right.
That'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. And if all you care about is, well, I mean, it's just, it's.
But it's not as well known, I think, around here that really the state is a leader in this area. So I'm hoping to talk a bit about the sort of the broader state and particularly some of the smaller communities and how we're improving their bike planning and hopefully get more bike usage as a result and bring that broader perspective. Before I do that, I wanted to mention one thing about ODOT that I think is really exciting. It's something that's happened just in the last year or so. There's an agency initiative called Intermodal Oregon. And even Bike Portland is saying, hey, this is a good thing because most DOTs, they started out as highway institutes or highway planning departments. And so oftentimes bike and alternative modes and transit and walking are very secondary, and we're trying to change that. This is one of those efforts to break the mold. And really the reasons for it are, largely we have a lot of economic and demographic things going on that are changing what people want out of their transportation system. And their behaviors are changing and the needs are changing. And in addition, the other thing that overrides all this is funding. Gas tax is not keeping up with our funding. We don't have as much money, so we're not going to be investing in those big highway projects because we just don't have that kind of money. So these are sort of smaller things we can do to help people in some of the changing needs. So what's going on in ODOT is a real change in thinking. We're still getting our money in sort of siloed modal areas, and that's why we're set up in different modal divisions. But we're trying to cross that by thinking and making decisions in a more multimodal or intermodal. And this is on the passenger side with the bikes and peds, but also on the freight side, trying to link up modes and so forth. So we're getting coordinated decisions, research, and so forth. So I think it's a really positive thing going on. So then I wanted to give you a little bit of statistics, not just on Portland, but on the larger state. And so as you can see here, Oregon's also a leader in bike. And I think we're about second in the nation when you look just at bike commuting. Here we're looking at both bike and walking, and you can see of the peers up there, we're sort of a higher than average up there share of biking. So biking's a big deal in Oregon. And as I note down here, it's not, Corvallis, I think for Portland it's about 6% biking from the new census ACS, and we got Corvallis there at 9, Eugene also at 6, and there's a lot of biking in Bend, although maybe it's more recreational, and so they don't quite get up on this list. But certainly all the communities, big communities, are doing great in this area. But if you look at the big picture internationally, the U.S. up there is only like 1%, whereas some of these other areas, we know Netherlands is at 30, Germany's at, 10%, and this is, we're not even talking China and so forth yet, where things are quite high. So there's a lot of things we can still do to improve. And this is, I think, an opportunity. So the new growth in bike travel, I think, is going to come with the short trips. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people out here that think you could go or can go more than 5 miles, but the new users that we hope to bring in, the big opportunity is in the short trips. And as you can see down here, we're getting just 1 or 2% in these smaller trips up to 4 miles, whereas these other locations, Germany, Denmark, Netherlands, they have 10, 20, 30% of biking, the white components of those bars. So there's a lot of potential here that we're not tapping. And then over here, I wanted to highlight really some of the co-benefits and where biking fits into the larger transportation system. There's a lot of health benefits that we're seeing more and more value with, and environmental benefits as well. Also something that we're more concerned with in the last year or so. So I think we're at kind of a good juncture point here in the state or in the nation that really, I should talk about the state here, need for bike planning and analysis. So you go back to when ODOT was started, and it was Highway Division at that point, but in 1913 when it was started, they had a slogan to get out of the mud, and that was because they didn't have roads that connected, that weren't stuck in the mud. You couldn't get to where you wanted to go. I think that's where we are with biking. There are some places that are good, but do they connect to where you want to go, and are they good for all users in terms of your, how you perceive your stress, your safety perception? I think those are where we're headed, and we're trying to grab more users, and so we need to pay attention to those things and get out of the mud. So how does ODOT headquarters help? So I'm in Salem with the headquarters group. There's also a region ODOT office here that does a lot of more local plans, but at the sort of meta level, we have a few things going on. So in 2011, there was a group formed called the Active Transportation Group within ODOT, and really it was largely a funding thing. I mean, they certainly do a lot of efforts, but their major benefit, I think, is to strategically figure out how they can find monies in one place to start investing in some of these non-motorized modes. That's, I think, a good positive thing happening. We have the Transportation Planning Group, and they set policy and direction and guidance for the state that all the other plans will follow, and right now they're doing a bike ped plan. They're moving on, or they are also doing a transportation options plan, and the transit plan's coming up. So we're doing lots of things in this area. And I'm in the Transportation Planning Analysis Unit, which is the last one there, so I know more about it. And I think it's pretty unique in that we are covering both the development and the application of models. So we sort of understand what the questions are, and we can go back and develop the models for them and maintain them. So this is what we say we do in TPAL, is we use data, transform that into something that can be used by decision makers. One of the key things that my group does is we produce a guidance document called the Analysis Procedures Manual, and this is really codifies methodologies and best practices for analyzing transportation projects across Oregon. The reason we're doing this is to standardize it and improve it. In fact, we've gotten lots of kudos. I think we were the first state to really do this. A lot of states have since borrowed this concept, borrowed ours as a starting point. So I think it's been really valuable, and it's used by consultants as they work on projects, so they know what they're supposed to do. It's used by ODOT to do projects on our own. In addition, some of the ODOT regions may not have as much skills, but they are able to sort of assess a project and whether it's doing best practices or what's expected because they have this guidance. So I wanted to make sure everybody knew about that. I didn't know a lot about it till I got into ODOT, but I think it's a really valuable thing. So we're continually updating that. The version 1 is online, and version 2 is underway. And I'll be talking about version 2 a little bit, but so here's how you get it online. Pretty easy to get right off the ODOT page. You go to planning, and then you find this. If you go there, you end up being able to download the current one, and then you can see over here the second column is the version 2 that's underway, and I'm really going to be talking about this new chapter that's under review still, so it's not quite out there, Chapter 14, Multimodal Analysis. So this comes right out of our draft document. And so it's our process for thinking about multimodal analysis. It's not just bikes, it's all modes. And the key message framing this whole chapter is that one tool does not fit all needs. We have, you start out and you're looking at the system. You look at the big level and you're trying to say, can we connect people to where they need to go? Is it generally good? Where are the bad spots? You're thinking big picture system. And so you have one tool for that. And when you think of then once you decide, okay, there's certain areas that I want to work on, and now I want to have a little bit more, or a little less subjective view of a particular facility. And so you might want to do some alternative project screenings, that kind of thing. And then once you get down to like, okay, I understand this section that I'm working on now I need to design it. So now I need to know how far things should be away, widths of lanes and bike lanes, and whether you should share a sidewalk or you should have separate bike lanes, some of those things which are pretty specific within a corridor or a particular location. So as we go through this, we have different needs, and as you go down to design, lots more data is needed. So you can start up there with not a lot of data, get your big picture, and then drill down. So we have 3 different tools that we do for this. And the first one I'll talk about, I'll start at the bottom here with the most detailed. And I think a lot of people might be familiar with this. It's basically borrowing the Highway Capacity Manual, multimodal level of service. So if you've seen this, there's a series of equations. They basically operate around links, intersections, and then a segment, which is your link and the intersection after it, because you need to go through the intersection to complete that segment. So, it's not rocket science here, but you can see there's a lot of variables and a lot of data are needed. And the result of this ends up to be a level of service, just like you would have on a highway, A through F, for each element of the road bike network. So here's a set of the data, and really what's happening is, as we've gone through this ourselves in a couple places, and probably other people have similar experiences, we've found that the data is really intensive. So especially as you get to the intersections, you need to know, how far is your transit stop from the corner, because someone might have to go across the corner to get to the other side to make a bike or a bus connection. So, you don't know that when you're looking at a big picture, and even when you're looking at the small picture, it takes more, you got to get out there and start measuring things, and not everybody can do that. So people started using defaults and so forth. And so we realized, hey, we need to simplify it. So that's where we went to the next method that says, do all these data that were required down here, do they matter? Which ones are important? So we've been borrowing this work here by some folks that had actually worked and done, some principal investigators on the work that led to the previous Highway Capacity Manual 2010, MMLOS. And so they identified the most influential factors, and they took it from basically 13 main factors down to these 4. And these 4 are either, is it 1 lane or is it more? Is it bike lane present or not? So this is a lot more simple than what we were working with before, and you end up with a similar score. Certainly, it's not quite as accurate, but for sometimes when all you need is kind of a rough order of magnitude, this is something we think is going to be fruitful. And I'll just, here, we're basically replicating their equations. And so you have the coefficients up there. In step 2, your variables are 0, 1, or 2. It's coming up with utilities for the cumulative logistic function, and then it's getting a probability, and the highest probability is what level of service you have. So this is not that hard. We're just replicating the research here. What they're finding is, here's comparing, out of the original videos that they had done of what people perceived their stress levels under different conditions. Here's 2 clips, 321 and 309, of different conditions. This one over here is, high volume. It does have a bike lane, but it's high volume and relatively fast speeds and a decent amount of driveways. And the one over here is low volume, undivided, more your local residential streets. So they're matching pretty good. It's not perfect, but for a first cut, you're probably going to get the right, generally the right area, and that might be enough to compare scenarios relatively and move on to a more detailed one and just a couple locations. So the last area of analysis that I was going to talk about is this top planning, more strategic level. And it actually involves 2 things. The first one is a qualitative assessment, where we basically take the same things out of that bottom level, but now instead of having to have all the detail, we just sort of give it a good, fair pour. So you can do this with people that have local knowledge without a whole lot of additional work. And maybe you have to do what they call a windshield field survey or something like that, where you have to drive through the area. But significantly reduced data requirements. And so here's an example of how that was used. This is, DEA did this study in Talent, Oregon, and so it's on Oregon 99, which is the parallel there to I-5 down by Ashland. And so they started out with a 4-lane freeway that actually has no bike lanes or any, so the bikes and pedestrians are sort of sharing that outside shoulder. so rated poor initially. Then they had two alternatives. Do we go to the 3-lane, which is kind of a road diet idea with a middle turn lane, or go to 5 lanes? And what they found is that 5 lanes was helpful because the volumes were spread out now across more lanes, so bikes were running against a lane that didn't have as much volume in it. So the segments got better. You got some fare there. And I should say that they put bike lanes on both sides and sidewalks on both sides in both of these cases. But the 3 lanes was better at the intersections because the intersections didn't get so huge, so you didn't have to cross a 5-lane area at the intersections, whether you're on a bike or a pedestrian. So that ended up to be better for the pedestrians and better at the intersections for the bike. So, this is a good thing. You can understand the trade-offs here, and it's helpful in the decision-making. Okay, so the other part of this is the level of traffic stress, which I'm really excited about this analysis because I think a lot of work that we do dives right into the detail and looks just at this myopic, project or intersection. When in reality, you got to back up and say, I got to get to places. That could be the greatest facility in the world, but if it doesn't connect, either before I get there or after I get there, it's not helping me out. So I think it's really important to look at connectivity, and that's what this tool gets at, unlike the other tools. And the other big part about this is it's a bike level of traffic stress. So we're looking at classifying the roadways based on the perceived safety or perceived stress of a number of users, and it really relies on the close proximity to auto, how your stress is relative to the autos that you're in proximity to. It's a quick assessment of connectivity without a lot of data collection, and it helps you prioritize your improvements and looks at different users. And the data that's collected here is really already being collected in the typical kind of plans that are done, the TSPs, Transportation System Plans. And the results end up to be quite visual, and I'll show you some of those. So you may have seen this before. This was actually something started in Portland. Roger Geller, PBOT bicycle coordinator back in 2006, and this has gone around and come back. And I think Jennifer Dill here verified that his intuition on the percentages here was spot on. So I guess at this point I'd like to ask you, well, let me explain a little bit. So these are different users of the bike system. So it ranges from people that are strong and fearless. They'll go anywhere on their bicycles. So they're not worried about high volume streets and so forth. Then you get enthused and confident, so they might go a little bit further out of the way to avoid a place that they don't feel comfortable in. And then there's this huge, 60% of the people are in this interested but concerned area, and that's where we want to get to. But those people require bike boulevards and bike lanes and a lot more things to make them feel safer. And then, of course, there's this third of people that, we just write off right away because no way, no how. We got to work on that 60. So I was asking here, who thinks that they would consider themselves strong and fearless? All right, about 5 hands. Keep them up. Enthused and confident? Ooh, a bunch more. Geez, you guys are good. And then interested but concerned. I think there's pretty much, oh, no way, no how. Is anybody going to claim that one? Nobody. Okay. Not in Portland. Okay, so anyway, so we saw a huge jump with, well, actually the huge jump with enthused and confident here, but I think, so anyway, I think that illustrates that, we need to get and cover all users here in our planning. Okay. Gosh, didn't know this was animated. Okay, so what the method actually does is it takes those 4 user groups that we talked about, and groups them, LTS 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the ideal is to get to 2. And that's where younger children could be accompanied by an adult. 1 is where you could kind of bike to elementary school or bike to middle school or something. But 2 is, we figured, is going to maximize. And so the way they do it is they end up with these lookup tables. So this is not too hard to do. And this is all relying on something that was done at the Mineta Transportation Institute. And they end up with a lookup table. Here it's really the speed and the street number of lanes. That's the main criteria. There's really sort of 3 ways they look at this. This one is in mixed traffic where there is no bike lanes. There's 2 others that have a bike lane with and without parking. But they're basically the same framework of a lookup table. So you look in here and you find out, okay, my segment is LTS 2. And then you would go in, and there, in addition to just on the segments, there are intersections and the intersection crossing. So your intersection is oftentimes sort of the bottleneck and might downgrade your segment LTS rating. But just I'd note a few things in here that are also covered and considered. So certainly separated bike facilities and parking, mentioned that. And then the intersections really rely on right turns. So it's that right hook that they're most concerned about. And it depends on whether the right turn is to the right or left of the bike. And it is standard that we're in Oregon that we have the biker have right of way, and the right turn lane is usually, like a biker can go straight, and then the right turn lane actually is off, and they have to make a turn and cut through the biker. So we do have a standard in place that's the most safe. Let's see. It is safer than having a driver think that they just have this right of way, and somebody, you as a biker, have to cut across.
Why isn't the right turn lane to the right of the straight ahead lane? That would seem to be the obvious design.
Why is the right turn lane?
Not to the right of the straight ahead lane. That would be the obvious design.
The right turn lane is to the right of the straight ahead.
No, it's not. It's to the left of the straight ahead. The right lane goes straight ahead, and it's to the right of the right turn lane, which is why so many cyclists are killed by drivers turning right. So how can you stand there and say that's the most safe design?
Okay, well, there's other experts in the room that...
Car traffic, but it's not the most safe design.
Can we save the comments to the end, please?
Okay, we can address this later. Okay, so anyway, so that's the intersection approaches, and there's also the crossings themselves, which look at the signals and the size of the intersection, and whether there's medians to help as refuge. Okay, and the speed limits that are going on there. Okay, so generally we end up with these 4 areas. You know, they depend on speeds and the intersections, and you end up with this stress level that's graduated up there and for the certain type of cyclist. And it really kind of comes down to sort of almost a functional class. You have your residential local streets that aren't even divided. You have your collector level streets with bike lanes and often the CBD area. And then you have your low and sort of high speed and few lanes and multi-lane areas. And what we're trying to do is this is the target level, as I mentioned. Over here, this is what we target for going to certain locations like parks and schools where you would expect to have younger children or people that are not you know, comfortable in some of the other areas. So we're taking that approach, and we are implementing it in the ODOT Analysis Procedures Manual, and as we do that, we're reformatting it to remove inconsistencies. We're doing some flexibility on some comments that came up in terms of left turn lanes on bicycle routes, more flexibility in a number of factors about hills and pavement conditions and such. And we kind of looked at rural applications where there's low volumes of shoulder. That's an area that we're particularly concerned with. And we're considering extending this to pedestrians as well, if that makes sense and works. Okay, so here's an example of how this was used in practice for a small community. Oregon is out on the Columbia Gorge out by Umatilla, and this is actually a U.S. route that runs through town, US 730 Columbia River Highway, and to the north of that is Main Street. And they have school on the north of that road, and the people that have kids that live on the south bus their kids across this, you know, just a mile or 2 or less even area, because there's really no good crosswalks existing on that U.S. route there. So what this does is before the improvement, peds and bikes were poor. They were at LTS 3. And then after the improvement, which included a number of crossings and the beacon crossings and some bike pathways along the route, you know, it moved to a good or LTS 1. Here's another example that I'm pulling from OSU. Matthew Palm was a intern in our offices for a while, and so he's done some work using the bike LTS in Salem. So here is the LTS for all the streets in the whole city. So you can see, the ones that are easy are these grid kind of streets people are able to get around, and once they hit, commercial street that runs through downtown Liberty, and even some of the downtown areas, it's a lot more dicey. So very valuable just to see this and look at it. The second really interesting thing you can do with this is start to think about islands. So this area you have in red, you have the central business district located within that area, and everything you can get to with an LTS 2 or 1 is in red as well. But you can see West Salem across the river there, it's an island in itself. It actually has pretty good connectivity on its own, but it can't get to downtown. So right now they're building some riverfront crossings that should improve that, and all of a sudden that part will turn red as well. The second area they're talking about some improvements is down in this triangular area. The plan has just started, but if they could provide one crossing in that area, or a couple, you could now have access to those people in red as well. So it's useful to kind of prioritize and identify what can help, and then you can zoom in and say, how wide should the lanes be, bike lane be, and other dimensions. Oh, so those are the two spots. So I just wanted to highlight some of the more innovative work that has been going on using these methods across the state, some of the small town areas. The Brookings, Ashland, and Oregon were some of the first that we tried, and Oregon 99 and the other areas have been coming along as well. So we're trying out these methods and learning as we go, and eventually we'll get that analysis procedures manual set up. Okay, so before I left, that was all on the methods, but I want to tell you about some other things that are going on at ODOT that relate to bikes, since I probably have a bike crowd here. First up there was we found that a lot of communities were starting to collect bike counts, maybe not 24/7. ODOT does have a 24/7 permanent count out on I-205. But there's not a whole lot of permanent counts. A lot of people are putting them out and bringing them back. But even with that, they're getting lots of data. And how do we get this data out and in a place where the public can use it, or even other jurisdictions? And is there a standardized format? So we're working here with PSU through the NHTSA grant process. We've pulled together, I think it's almost all the MPOs, 5 or 6 MPOs in the state, and some smaller communities, and then national as well. I know Boulder's been through some money into the pot. So hopefully to get something standard up there that everyone would have access to this in this sort of new area where we're collecting all sorts of data and need something to do with it to make it useful. Secondly, there's some research that Miguel Figliozzi is leading up on a bike app, and I know when we first met, all sorts of things we wanted to do with a bike app. Do we just get routes so we know where people are traveling? That's useful to know. Which ones should we maintain? Which should we get how they perceive those routes? Because even though they're riding them, maybe they think that there should be improvements, so we could get their perceptions. Should we have them give us feedback on the facilities and whether this one has, if you could just fix this one place, or I wouldn't take my child here. All sorts of things we could be collecting. Could be the data that we need for some of these methods. So I know he's got a tough job here figuring out what exactly we're going to catch with that bike app. But that's another research work. And then the third one here is the travel cost index. That's a sort of interesting one that involves multi-modes, and Liming is leading that one. And so it's more of an economic kind of thinking about things. And it really is, if you're familiar with the consumer price index, where you have a basket of goods that you buy, and they index how costly that goods are over time, and you're able to track whether that's getting higher or lower. We're doing the same here, but the idea is you have a sort of basket of destinations that you need to get to. You got to get to sort of your school and your grocery and so forth. And so then as you get more connected, you're able to get to more of those things, or to do that in a smaller footprint. So this is a way for us to index over time if we're improving that system. The third one here is changes. Oh, yes. So this is an interesting one. And I put PSU. It really should be OSU. Oregon State University, Haizhong Wang is doing this. And we're looking at, because there's so many new things going on, whether it's the new fuels and fleets we're going to have, if it's connected vehicles, if it's electric bikes, if it's car sharing, car to go, how do all these things fit together? How do they fit with the demographic changes we're seeing? And so he's sort of putting what we call a cognitive map together about all those issues and how they relate to VMT and other things. So it's a real interesting project. The last one here, I'll show you a little bit of this, hot off the presses. We're working with a group that maybe some of you know of called Strava. It's one of those things that's on the web that you can track your ride on a GPS and see it and track your time and all that. In addition, they kind of up the ante and have people compete and become king of the hill of this one route and so forth, and sort of win prizes and virtual prizes and so forth. But we actually took their data. We're a pilot program for them. We're trying to figure out how this data can be used in analysis in addition to being used for people wanting their own personal routes. And so we took a year's worth of data from them. And granted, this is probably a little more focused on recreation, but they do have a decent amount of other trips. And so this is 1 year of data, and we've got it all over the state. But then you can zoom into the particular area and identify, where are people frequently routing. So this is basically a heat map where the red indicates there's lots of trips going there, and the green is where there's not nearly as many. So you can definitely see, people have a bunch of sort of bike boulevard ideas, and then they move down and focus at the junctures to get to certain places. And this also tells us things like, oh, people are cutting through a parking lot, and we need to maybe make a connection or at least recognize that there is a way to get through, and people do that. So this is really exciting. We're just getting this now, and it's great that we're getting it for all these different communities. A couple other things. Bicycle and pedestrian travel assessment report. This is where Alta went out and interviewed a bunch of ODOT sort of senior officials and talked to them about bike data and bike needs and what they were doing, and then compared that nationally and came up with some recommendations. So that's an interesting report. And I mentioned that the ODOT is right now doing some statewide policy plans. And so those are, a couple of them are ongoing, and the transit plan will be the next one. And then the other thing that I think is kind of interesting is the tourism has got on board, and they're spending like $1 million. They've just opened this new site, Ride Oregon Ride, and has all sorts of ways to make it easier for people to do bike tourism. So with that, oh, here we go. Yeah, so I'll take any questions, and I have some websites up here that help you get to certain things. And I should say right off, that I was hoping to have the guy who actually applies a lot of these methods with me today, but he was unable to make it. So you can always talk to Peter, and in fact, he'll be at the Northwest Transportation Conference in March. When is that? March 11th, I believe. March 11th through 13th at OSU that I know a number of you are participating in. So, all right, great. Thank you.
Ask a question, say your name first so I can call you.
Go to the back.
Jeff Broderick. I'm wondering if ODOT, what they do to promote networking between different regions or interregionally between Oregon, because you showed several examples of specific locations, but I'm thinking, how are you connecting Medford, Talent, and Ashland to each other through active transportation?
Right. So the larger MPOs have a forum there because they are required by feds to, when you're over 50,000 population, you are a designated metropolitan planning organization. And so those people have a forum where they meet and talk about things. And certainly I've been to several of those, and those topics are coming up. So that's in a straight policy level for those. And then the regions, so ODOT is broken into regions. So within a region, those people are covering all the folks in that area. So they would connect if, Irrigon came up with something and then Umatilla came up with something else. They both have to go through the region, so the region would know how they would relate to each other. And then at the state level, we have, on the analysis side, we meet I think it's monthly with this group. There's an overarching Oregon Modeling Steering Committee, and so it's about modeling, and it's about how we improve this in our state, and we have people there from the health organ. In fact, actually the two new subcommittees are on freight and health, and because we want to model those better. And so that's a forum where we certainly talk about, hey, what are you doing in Metro, and what are you doing down in Bend? And so it's really those large MPOs that tend to have that conversation there. So I would say that covers it.
I have a follow-up question.
Okay.
Has ODOT or Bike Oregon ever considered doing something like Sunday parkways, but more on, not necessarily a statewide level, but like, the Grand Juan Valley, La Grande, Union, Elgin, like closing down some state highways on a Sunday and promoting anybody going on a bike ride between towns in a more safe environment?
Right. I think that sounds like a great idea. I might not know if that was happening. That would really be our active transportation group, but I can actually take that back and ask them about it. I've been to several of those around here. Great. Okay, more questions. Let's start down here.
I have actually two that are kind of not related. The first one, the highway capacity manual, when they do the level of service, it's kind of iterative because you do your design for each thing and get the level of service you want for each mode, and then you have to kind of go back to, well, how does that level of service, how do those changes actually affect the auto trend? Right, the auto level of service in the area. So I was kind of curious if there is a similar thing. I didn't really see any kind of reciprocal or iterative thing there on your level of traffic stress that you're doing. It looks like kind of a neat new approach, but I don't, how does that go back to, well, how is the traffic stress affected by, of the people driving, affected by the way we reduce the stress? And then my other question, I think, was sort of covered here just a little bit, but you talked a lot about connectivity and how you get to places. And I was wondering if ODOT is looking at all in intercommunity connectivity.
Let me take the first one. So I think we do have the qualitative that is combined with the BLTS at the top level. So I think we're sort of covering both. And the other thing I would say is that at that level, you might be saying, what connection do I need to get that triangle of people access to the CBD? And I don't know exactly where it is yet. I'm just looking that I need a connection. And so it doesn't, then you can figure out which one will flow better when you start considering all the other modes. So then you think of a multimodal approach when you say, I need a connection, now I need to know where, and more specifically. So then you can use those other methods as you go down the pyramid to do that more in the context of the other modes. And I agree it's very important, because some place might be much better than others.
Start with a level of stress, and then as you work down, you kind of go back to level of service or something.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, and then the other thing you were asking about was intermodal. There actually is, that's something that the state handles a little bit more. We have a statewide model that looks at intermodal. I mean, this tends to be not as much on the bikes because it's a little longer and people might not do that as much of a frequency. Might be more of a recreational trip, and we are studying recreational routes and how to do that better. But we're finding out, I did not know this, but way out on the east side, the region out there is doing amazing things in, like, people are just like grassroots coming and biking in places that they really don't have any good facilities at all. Their mode share is pretty high in biking, walking, and so there's pop-up like park and ride lots that are happening, and people are biking on these shoulders, but it's pretty open out there. You don't have like windy roads and stuff, so people are perceiving it as somewhat safe, and they're going ahead and doing things, and it's almost like we need to catch up with what the people are doing and make it good enough so we can broaden. So I guess that's not quite getting to the inner city. I think we have groups of people that are talking about inner city, and I know they're doing it in transit, trying to connect transit routes, because there are like these edges, and they're trying to find out where they overlap and then try to figure out how the schedules can match. If we can at least identify them, then we can start making improved connections there. So intermodal, I think, ties in with that a little bit as well. So, okay. Over here.
My name is Trey Kundal. I was wondering, you showed some maps and there was a lot of data and stuff. Does any of that get translated into like a GIS format or something that's like accessible to be used for like other mapping applications?
Oh yeah, we use GIS all the time, and pretty much everything gets into a format that you can use for GIS, or a lot of the software programs that you use for modeling have networks as well, and so these end up to be attributes on a network, whether it's in one of those formats or another. The distinction you often make with networks is whether that network is routable. GIS, you can't route from A to B, so you don't know if you're getting that connectivity, whereas some of the other modeling tools will allow you to sort of put demand on the network going from point A to point B, and it'll tell you whether you can do that. So, but both of those are available. Okay. Yeah.
So I have a number of questions about the data. You've made statements, for example, the Oregon experiment. You said that after you built these crossings of the state highway, things got better. But better according to what metric? According to your estimates, or according to surveys done of the people, or according to measures of the number of bike trips, or what metrics?
Right. So I think the Oregon was done with the qualitative, so it's still relatively subjective. I would give you that. As we go further down there, it's less subjective. But I think still you can build it, but people don't necessarily come, right? So we are, all that, even the MMLOS at the bottom of the pyramid is based on 1,400 data points where people said, I think this for me would be a level assess 3 or 4. And when I showed some of those bar charts of the data, everybody doesn't agree. So there's certainly a lot of subjectivity in here. But I think, you try to find the trends, and we're planning to that.
I'm not a transportation person, so I'm trying to understand your terminology.
Mm-hmm.
So you showed the bar graphs around about slide 19 or 18.
Mm-hmm.
You were comparing the readings off of your model with what?
Oh, okay. Where was that? Oh, there.
Maybe you just skipped over it.
Right there. There.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
You're trying to see if the simplified model actually reflects.
Observed.
So what's observed?
Observed is people. Gosh, I'm not sure what the highway capacity manual actually did, whether they were simulated, they were in a simulator and saw this route, which had the attributes that are shown there. Chris, do you know?
Mostly routes in Florida, where they videotaped it from a cyclist perspective. They surveyed people in sort of 3 cities and asked them, what do you rate this facility on a scale from 1 to 6? So that would be the red distribution. And then
So it's subjective reports from some number of human subjects.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Which I think this is interesting because they don't agree, right? Which I think highlights this. If you broke this into user groups and said, the fearless 1%, they might agree a lot more than, so if you broke them into user groups, I think you'd tighten up these distributions a lot, which might be an interesting tack to take. But that's not the way Highway Capacity Manual did it. Okay, great. Over here.
Excuse me, Jacob Adams. Is there any state mandate or state goal that requires the tracking of these levels of services, or is this just something that ODOT is pursuing on its own?
Well, the bike ped plan is coming out. There hasn't been one before, and we're coordinating with them about our new methods so that they will come out probably with some guidance on that. But I would say right now there is not. To be determined.
So has the simplified MMLOS been applied in rural areas at all? And do you think it would, or do you think you need to recalibrate it?
Yeah, I have to say that it's pretty early on that simplified, and we really just kind of have been working to understand it. And I know Peter has done a lot of work that focused on the small, more low-volume areas and how it applies there, but I can't say at this point. Peter might have more to say at the transportation conference. Yeah, it's urban, right. So we need alternative methods.
More of our materials program. Daniel Stumpf. I had a question as far as the highway capacity manual equations for solving LOS. Does ODOT ever adjust these equations to better fit Oregon drivers and bicyclists rather than using the highway capacity manual for like a state-to-state?
It's Sounds like a good research project for a grad student. We do stuff like that, but we haven't done that. Over here?
The Strava research, is that available online or anything, or is that?
No, this is hot off the press. I'm hoping, actually, we didn't talk to them that I was going to share it. So, yeah, we're trying to figure out how to use it because it's, we wanted to say, like, when do people go to work? But it's like, it's not work, but where do they recreate? And maybe we need to maintain some of the roadways because, those shoulders are being used more than we expected for biking. So not quite sure what the value is, but go ahead.
I had one more. For the level of transportation service, the LTS one was separated bike lanes. Are there any bike lanes in Oregon that are separated not just by, like, say, the parked cars or kind of a row of cones, but any bike lanes that are actually up on the curb like you might see in the Netherlands or other cities?
I don't know of any. And if, the three communities that would have this would be Eugene, Corvallis, or here. What's that?
Okay.
There's one in Blvd.
Oh, yeah.
I saw something in, I think it was in Seattle, where you could actually step, because they have more hills, so you step on something, and it lifts you up the hill. It's just like a continuous tractor, kind of. So, and I need to, like, today I biked here, or I typically bike here. I biked here yesterday on my 2 days in Portland. And today I was like, I'm wearing a suit. It's not quite what I want to do, so I tried Car2Go. But I realized when I got into the city why I bike, because all the bikes were streaming past me, and I was stuck at every light. But also, I was thinking an electric bike would have worked well for me with a little more power, then I wouldn't have to sweat. Yeah?
I actually also had a Strava question. Is the data that you guys are getting from them, is that like an agreement, or because they're like you have to pay for the app, correct? When you buy, I think Strava you have to buy. Is it free?
I think it's free. Yeah, you can download it off the web.
Do you guys they just gave it to you, or how did that?
Well, the thing is, they think that they might. I suspect that they think they might be able to have a market here, but they don't know what it is yet. And so we have a partnership to kind of understand that kind of in both directions. So I don't know in the future they may charge. If it's something that we can share, we will. We have a couple areas in the state that we're trying to open up for research. Where we're collecting, say, Bluetooth data, GPS based on speeds and sort of origin destinations, because they can track you, across the city or something. So I know Newport area is something that we're calling the Newport Sandbox, and not only do we have a model there that we can share with people, but we're going to have Bluetooth data and some speeds from other GPS sources. And so this is the kind of thing we'd like to put out for research. Peter.
Good presentation, Tara. In the Oregon slide that you showed, there were several TSP examples that used your LTS or one of the other methodologies. I'm wondering if any of them used it for project prioritization as opposed to design.
Well, let's see if I can get back there, because I think I noted, if they're using it for LTS, it's not design. It's really at that higher level. If they're using like the MMLOS in a qualitative way, it's probably for design. That's about all I can share without Peter being here to help me out with that. Okay.
Because we're in the midst of project prioritization for our, coming up with a methodology for project prioritization for our TSP. This is one of the issues that we're running into is before projects are designed, what criteria to use.
Okay, great.
I noticed that the Springwater corridor has been under construction for a while, and I was just wondering if you might know what the plans are for the construction over there and when it might be opening. I know this is kind of...
No, well, I mean, I'm at the state level, so that would actually be either Metro, which is the local jurisdiction would be the city, and then Metro is the next government there at a region, and then you have your ODOT region that works with Metro, and then there's me at the state level. So I'm like 5 steps removed from that, even though I use it. So I would like to know the answer too, but I can't answer that.
Just tell them ODOT's going to pay for it.
Right, so there's money there, so still glad we're around. Okay, thanks. exhausted your questions, and I talked really fast. Okay. Krista?
I was wondering, when you get the count data that you're going to be organizing, how will you use it?
Well, your steering committee would know better than I. You know, I think if you are jurisdiction and you're collecting it, you just needed a place that you could say, hey, something's happening over on this side of the town. I want to query this over the last month and see what the trends are, or the last time we took collections, what we know about that area. So there would be places that you're zooming in. So this an easy tool to allow you to do that. Then there might be things, you know, cross-cutting to say nationally, how do these people compare? How do behaviors compare, or seasons and such? One thing we've talked about too is how do you expand the data from, you know, this hour of the day or something to represent how many bike miles have traveled, or some kind of measure of an annual basis or a daily basis that maybe you don't have collections. So certainly data that could help us calculate some of those things. So great.
You had mentioned something about how ODOT is trying to organize travel between regions or between agencies.
Yeah.
Or make it a little more multimodal. ODOT does sponsor Amtrak service
Right.
up and down the valley and into in conjunction with WashDOT, and the Cascades trains do have bike racks on them. You have to pay $5 a segment, but
yes, I was remiss because our transit group works on that stuff diligently, and there's been a lot of improvements, particularly between Portland and Salem lately. People are telling me I should be taking that instead of my van pool. But I still have to get downtown to take it. But the frequency is such that you can like go to Salem and come back in a day, and I think there might even be one other option in case something happens that you want to get back. So they spend a lot of effort in that. Funding's, you know, hard to find, but that's why we've formed the Active Transportation Group and trying to do this Intermodal Oregon to be more strategic on that. Great. Oh, good. More questions here.
I was wondering, on the next slide, I think it is, where you have that map. Yeah, this one. I noticed that there isn't really, that was the core ballot, which I can't remember which map it is now. But I noticed that you didn't have any service, it like skipped a service level, like you didn't have any service level 3. It just jumped from like 1 to 4 in places. I was
Talking about the Salem map?
It made it
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's
I think it's the blue.
Yeah, the next one back. Yeah, that map. I noticed there wasn't a 3, I was for 2. Yeah, there are 2.
Oh, there isn't very many 2s?
Actually, I don't see any on that map.
There are 2s. This is like a blue section right here.
Purple and blue.
And this is a little bit blue. So I can see them better on here than you can see them up here. But there's not very many blue.
I was kind of curious that it went straight from 1 to 3, and I was kind of curious of why you think that might be.
Well, we do often lump 1 and 2 together because they may be more similar in many ways. So could be that there's just not a lot of distinction in the method or the way they were interpreting the data as they went through. So it'd be something maybe to even look at to make sure you're getting sort of the full benefit of the spectrum.
For one more, I was wondering, is there any plans to implement, you said funding was an issue, of course it always is for everybody, so is there like a plan to do extra taxing or any extra, I don't know, an implementation for the actual people who use this stuff to fund research to help get more?
I'm sure there's all sorts of things. We have a legislative session going on, and they're talking about taxation. The big thing that I would say is that our gas tax is shrinking because as we move to more fuel-efficient vehicles, we buy less gas, and it's on a per dollar basis with gas. So that's a national problem. So our federal match on things is shrinking, and as well our local or state taxes on that. So the solution, and Oregon's a real leader in this, is to convert over. We were the first one to do a gas tax, actually, in Oregon. So I'm hoping we're the first one to do what we're calling a VMT fee. And so it's a per-mile fee. So if you've got a hybrid or truck or whatever, you're paying per mile per your damage on the roadway system. So that's been piloted once. Now it's kind of in a second pilot. You know, there's some privacy issues, but hopefully we can get over those because we're really just trying to count how many miles you are driving and tabulate that and have you pay more equitably for the roads that you're using. Otherwise, they're going to continue to deteriorate because we're just not going to be able to keep up with it. A lot of head shaking there. Yeah.
I would assume that Denmark and the Netherlands have their own level of service rating system, and I would be curious to see how our level of service is compared to theirs. Like, is our A their C, or
That's a great question, and I would love to see that. I mean, that'd be a great thing to do as a project, I would think, to compare what those measures are. Yeah, it's true. I mean, when I work at the rest of the state, a lot of times we have to have like a separate category for Portland because it has so many more kind of density levels than we have elsewhere in the state. So I can understand how that would be for Netherlands the same way relative to sort of the rest of the world almost. But, you know, do these same things apply, that they just, you know, more fine-tuned to it, or is it totally different? Maybe they're more in the situation where they actually have a connected network because people are already using it, and so they're more concerned about maybe capacity on it. You know, we haven't really been worried about that. We're getting out of the mud still. So once we do have people riding it at the levels that Netherlands have, you know, you might have different questions and need different tools. All right, Louis?
Online question. I think it's probably more than comments. In the level of transportation stress, whether some other factors like lightning and perceived security and safety could be pretty important. Could be important factors. Whether those has been considered.
Yeah. Let me see if I can find my. So I think some of these are listed in this more flexibility on other riding factors. And I think, you know, as we've taken this out to comments, we've certainly got that. And so I think the idea now is that you would do your LTS, but then you might do some cautionary things like let's go in and find where there's hills, or the grade is above a certain amount, or where the pavement condition is bad, or whatever. I think it's almost more of an overlay thinking, although I'm not sure how Peter is headed towards this right now.
Route directness is something which comes up when you look at a network as opposed to just segments.
Mm-hmm.
Does that appear in any of the methodologies around
Yeah.
direction?
Yeah, I didn't mention that, but I think they typically allow like a 25% out of direction relative to the shortest path to get there on a bike. And if more than that, that wouldn't be a viable route. I think I've seen that in the LTS, but that's more for when you're doing connectivity within that, when you're actually looking at trying to get from A to B. Whereas a lot of this is just saying, can you get there, period. So, but that's definitely an issue, and you know, different user groups are going to have different sensitivities to that, how far they will go outside. But at some point, you know, you don't. Although with air travel, we'll go backwards to go forwards, right? But maybe not if you're powered. Maybe with electric bikes, you would go further. I don't know. Yeah.
I wonder what processes you have for recalibrating your models against reality as the network changes.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of one example of that was the recent improvements in Portland on the Hawthorne Bridge. I mean, not that recently, but when the Hawthorne Bridge was remodeled, things got a lot better for bicyclists. Right? The cycles got wider. As a result of that, the level of bicycle traffic on that bridge has gone way up, as has the level of pedestrian traffic. And it's actually now the most hazardous part of my commute. And it only takes one person who decides to ride the wrong way down one of those sidewalks, and it's complete chaos. Right? So, and there's a bus going by, you know, 30 miles an hour, a foot away.
Right.
So, although I'm not saying this was a bad improvement, far from it, but now we sort of got to the next level. Those facilities are clearly inadequate. Another example, which ODOT was responsible for, was the bike path along Route 26 from Sylvan Summit down to Beaverton, which is great that it's there. But when they built it, they put like 1.5 meter square blocks of concrete to route the lampposts in, because no one thought, well, you know, going around them might be a problem. After all, we've got like an 8-foot wide path. Well, if you meet two people coming the other direction, actually that's a big problem, particularly at night on the downhill.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so sort of we've sort of come from one level to the next level, and now we need to look at those standards and say, oh, there were problems with the things we were building 5 years ago.
Right.
I don't know what the procedure is for reviewing it. Maybe this was a long way of asking a short question.
No, I mean, I think it's a common question here that's like, that's the next problem. That's the problem you want, is that you have too many people on these facilities, but maybe we should be anticipating that now so that we build things now that don't preclude us from, increasing the capacity. I mean, it's the same way if you build a roadway, right? You think, oh, right now I only need this one lane. All of a sudden these people show up that want to use the road, and you really should have built it bigger. So you need to step back and think about those things. And I think it's probably true that we're not thinking about capacity a lot, at least, some of these smaller communities. And, it could even be something where, like in Oregon, you could just count how many people there are, and you might not have a problem. But, you should be doing that sort of assessment. I think that's...
For car traffic.
Right, we've gotten that down.
Cornell Road was realigned on Washington County. But why are they building this huge, 6-lane road? There's nobody here. Right now it's full.
Right.
And that was only, I guess 20 years ago.
Right, or the Denver airport or something, right? So, yep.
Run out of time. Thanks.